sister who bullied me all throughout. My pregnancy BC, I was giving away my youth to take care of a baby, going as far as to body shame me and make me cry at my own baby shower. Suddenly wants to be involved in my and baby's life to impress her new fiance and is mad BC. I refuse and told her fiance exactly why. 4 weeks later she calls me with a bad news and oh boy. I, 27 female, never had the best relationship with my oldest sister, Jane, 32 female. But things really took a turn for the worse when I announced my pregnancy last year. For context, I've been with my husband, Mark, 29 male, for 8 years, married for 3, and we both have stable careers in finance and healthcare respectively. We'd always planned to start our family around this time, and when we found out I was expecting, our happiness knew no bounds. Jane, however, had different views on the matter. She's always prided herself on being the free spirit of the family, traveling extensively, changing careers every few years, which is completely fine. Everyone should live life on their own terms. But the moment she learned about my pregnancy, she turned it into a crusade against my life choices. It started with subtle digs about how I was throwing away my youth and settling for mediocrity. She would constantly remind me that I was only 27 and had my whole life ahead of me. These comments gradually evolved into full-blown criticism of every aspect of my pregnancy. I never expected her to understand or agree with my values, but to show blatant hate against my every action was just unnecessary. She would make snide remarks about my weight gain, saying things like, "I guess you're just giving up on your appearance altogether," and, some women actually maintain their figures during pregnancy. At first, I chalked it up to Jane being Jane, but the more I tried to ignore it, the worse it got. She'd send me articles about women who'd lost their identity after becoming mothers or forward memes about giving up on life once you had kids. It wasn't just body shaming anymore. It was like she had an active mission to make me regret my decision to have a child. I even found out she was gossiping about me to mutual friends, saying things like she's wasting her potential, or "I just don't get why anyone would choose to ruin their life like that." It hurt because these were the people I had been close to, and her words had planted seeds of doubt in their minds. One friend even asked me if I was really ready for the big responsibility of motherhood, a question that felt like a punch to the gut. The breaking point came during my baby shower. My mother and best friend had organized a beautiful celebration and everything was going perfectly until Jane showed up 3 hours late. Clearly tipsy, she spent the entire event making loud comments about how I looked ready to pop. Mind you, I was only 6 months along. She commented on how my face had gotten so puffy and how she couldn't believe I was choosing diapers over dreams. I ended up crying in the bathroom while my mother tried to comfort me. Mark was furious and asked her to leave, which she did, while dramatically proclaiming that we were all too sensitive. My other friends were equally upset by her behavior, but Jane just brushed it off. For weeks after that, she would bring up the incident, laughing about how everyone needs to relax and accusing me of being overly emotional because of the pregnancy. But it wasn't just the baby shower. There were smaller incidents too, things I didn't even want to acknowledge at the time because I was too exhausted to deal with them. Jane once invited me to a yoga class claiming it was her way of helping me stay in shape, but when I showed up, she spent the whole time making passive-aggressive unrealistic expectations of what I should be. She'd also casually drop by my house with friends of hers. She'd also casually drop by my house with friends of hers, treating me like a spectacle, pointing out how much my life was going to change and how she just couldn't imagine being tied down like that. These visits weren't about bonding or support. They were a way for her to flaunt her carefree life in my face. Fast forward to last month, Jane had gotten engaged to Robert, 34 male, a successful businessman who came from a very family-oriented background. I'd heard bits and pieces about him through my parents, how he came from an old money family, was well respected in his field and seemed like the perfect match for Jane, at least on paper. The engagement was sudden, though I suppose not entirely surprising given Jane's tendency to dive headfirst into new relationships and experiences without much foresight. But this time there was a notable shift in her behavior that I couldn't ignore. Almost overnight, my sister became a completely different person. Where there had been months of radio silence, no calls, no texts, no inquiries about me or my baby, she suddenly started reaching out regularly. It began with casual texts asking how the baby was doing, followed by offers to drop off gifts. She even bought expensive baby clothes and toys, things Mark and I had never asked for nor needed. At first, I tried to convince myself that maybe she was trying to make amends, but the more I thought about it, the more it felt like her sudden enthusiasm wasn't genuine but rather something she was doing for show. The final straw came when I discovered that Jane had been posting pictures of my daughter on her social media, pictures she had taken during one of her drop-in visits. I hadn't given her permission to share those photos, and I certainly hadn't been consulted about them. She captioned them with things like "the world's proudest aunt" and "look at my beautiful niece," painting this picture of a doting, involved family member. It was infuriating because I knew the truth. This wasn't about my daughter or her supposed love for family. It was about Jane trying to shape a narrative, especially in front of Robert, that didn't reflect the reality of who she was or how she had treated me throughout my pregnancy. Then Jane invited us to dinner. It was framed as a casual family gathering, but it was clear that the main purpose was for us to properly meet Robert. My parents were already enamored with him, and they insisted it would be a great opportunity for everyone to come together. Mark and I agreed to go, partly out of obligation, partly out of curiosity, to see how Jane would act in front of Robert and the rest of the family. The evening started off uneventfully. Jane was in full hostess mode, making sure everything was perfect. She introduced Robert to Mark and me with a kind of over-the-top warmth that felt rehearsed, like she was playing a role she hadn't quite mastered. Robert, to his credit, was polite and seemed genuinely kind, but there was a stiffness to the entire evening. I could sense the weight of unspoken things lingering in the air. As we sat down to dinner, the conversation shifted toward family, children, and future plans. Jane leaned into the narrative she had carefully crafted over the past few weeks, gushing about how much she loved spending time with my daughter and how excited she was to be an aunt. Robert, clearly impressed by the supposed side of Jane, chimed in with comments about how wonderful it was that Jane was so close to her niece. He said something along the lines of, "One of the things I love most about Jane is how she's always been so family-oriented, especially with her niece. Her love for children is something that really stood out to me." I couldn't hold back anymore. I looked at Robert, and with as much calm as I could muster, I told him the truth. I told him how Jane had treated me throughout my pregnancy, how she had body-shamed me, belittled my choices, and made my baby shower one of the most important days of my life, a living nightmare. I told him how she had mocked my decision to become a boring suburban mom, how she had texted me cruel messages about throwing away my life for a baby. The room grew tense. Jane's face drained of color, and for the first time that evening she was silent. Robert looked genuinely shocked, looking between Jane and me, processing everything I had said. He asked to see the text, and without hesitation, I handed him my phone, scrolling through the months of messages that documented Jane's relentless cruelty. As he read through them, the look on his face shifted from confusion to disbelief to anger. Jane said something about how she had been misunderstood and that she hadn't meant anything by her comments, but it was too late. The evidence was right there in black and white. Robert was clearly unsure of what to say or do. He stood up abruptly, excused himself from the table, and walked out of the restaurant. The rest of us sat there in stunned silence as we watched him leave. Jane was also fully in panic mode and followed him out, but not before turning to me and hissing, "You've ruined everything." That was 4 weeks ago, and what happened next was completely unexpected. Jane hadn't spoken to me since I was her voice. Her voice was shaky, and for the first time in years, she sounded vulnerable. She told me that Robert had called off the engagement. He couldn't reconcile the person she had shown him with the stories I had shared about her treatment of me. But now I don't know what to do. Jane hasn't reached out since that night, and, honestly, I'm not sure I want her to. The silence from my parents hasn't helped either. They've chosen to remain completely neutral, offering no opinions or support, as if they're waiting for the dust to settle and for me to just move on. I get the feeling they're more concerned with keeping the peace than acknowledging how deeply I was hurt by Jane's actions, both during my pregnancy and now. Is frustrating because despite everything, there's this small part of me that feels guilty. I wonder if I went too far by confronting her in front of Robert. I wonder if I'm at fault for her engagement falling apart. But then I think back to the months of cruel comments, the passive-aggressive jabs, and the way she had the audacity to act like she cared just to impress someone else, and I can't shake the feeling that no matter how much my family tries to minimize it, what Jane did was wrong. So am I at fault for exposing her, or was it finally standing up for myself in a way I should have a long time ago? I wish I could say I'm sure of the answer, but right now, I'm still trying to figure that out. And honestly, I could use some help. Update 1. It's been a few days since everything went down, and honestly, not much has changed. If anything, silence has only grown louder. My parents haven't said a word to me about the situation. They haven't even acknowledged what happened at the restaurant that night, and it's becoming clearer by the day that they just want this whole thing to blow over. I thought maybe they would try to at least offer some kind of support or even ask me how I'm doing after everything, but no. It's like they're choosing to pretend it didn't happen, hoping that somehow everything will fix itself if we all just stay quiet long enough. But what's really getting to me are the texts. I've been getting messages from mutual friends and cousins, all of them essentially saying the same thing, that I should reach out to Robert and smooth things over. Apparently, this is all about Jane's future now. They're more worried about her relationship with Robert than they are about the pain she caused me. Like her engagement somehow justifies all of the things she did. It's infuriating. Everyone keeps talking like it's my responsibility to fix this, like I'm the one who destroyed her relationship and I should be the one to mend it. Never mind the fact that Jane spent months emotionally tearing me down during one of the most vulnerable times of my life. No, apparently, the fact that I stood up for myself and told the truth is what's ruining her life. One cousin had the nerve to suggest that I should apologize to Jane, that it would be the mature thing to do. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Apologize? For what? For telling Robert the truth? For exposing the way Jane had treated me? Something that no one else seems to care about? The hypocrisy is astounding. I made it very clear to them and to anyone else who's asked that I don't believe in vengeance or holding grudges for the sake of it, but this isn't about revenge. It's about the fact that Jane emotionally hurt me at a time when I was already struggling. She made what should have been a joyful, beautiful experience, the birth of my first child, into a nightmare. How am I supposed to forgive that? What if I had lost the baby because of the stress she caused me? I was so depressed and anxious during my pregnancy, constantly worrying about her next hurtful comment or how she would twist the knife in deeper. I can't even count the number of sleepless nights I spent crying, wondering if I was somehow in the wrong for just wanting to enjoy this new chapter of my life. She robbed me of moments I'll never get back, and now everyone expects me to just brush it aside because it might affect her future. I also had a conversation with my parents the other day, though calling it a conversation feels generous. It was basically useless. I had hoped they might see things from my side and that they would at least acknowledge how deeply I was hurt. Instead, they tried to play neutral again. It was the same old song and dance, them sitting on the fence and acting like this was some kind of petty sibling squabble. I could tell, though, from their tone and the way they skirted around the issue, that they wanted me to be the bigger person. They want me to forgive Jane, to forget everything she did and move on because that's the right thing to do in their eyes. But I can't. I won't. I don't think they fully understand how much this has affected me. Or maybe they do and they just don't care. Either way, it was clear that I wasn't going to get any real support from them. My mom kept saying things like family is family, and you two have always had your differences, but your sisters and sisters forgive each other. My dad just nodded along, barely saying a word. It was like they were trying to sweep it under the rug, like this was just another one of Jane's little tantrums that I should overlook for the sake of peace. But this isn't about peace for me. It's about respect. It's about setting boundaries and refusing to let someone, even family, walk all over me just because they're blood. I won't let anyone make me feel guilty for protecting my own mental health and standing up for what's right. Everyone can keep telling me to forgive and forget, but right now, that's not something I can do. And frankly, I don't think I should have to. As for Jane, I haven't heard from her at all. Not a single word. Part of me wonders if she's waiting for me to come crawling back to make the first move like I have done so many times in the past. But this time is different. This time, I'm not going to be the one to bridge the gap. If she wants to talk, if she wants to repair things, she's going to have to come to me, and even then, I'm not sure I'm ready to let her back into my life after everything she's done. So here I am, stuck in this limbo where everyone seems to think I'm the villain of the story, the one who ruined everything. But I know my truth, and for now, that's enough. Update 2. Some things have happened since my last post, and honestly, I'm still trying to wrap my head around all of it. I never expected any of this to unfold the way it has, but here we are. After weeks of silence from Jane and hearing nothing from my parents beyond their usual neutrality, something surprising happened. Robert reached out to me. It was completely unexpected. Mark and I were out for lunch one afternoon when we bumped into him. I could tell he had spotted us first because he hesitated before walking over, but eventually he did. I braced myself for an awkward encounter, but to my surprise, he was incredibly calm and even warm. He asked if we could talk for a moment, so we stepped outside the cafe, leaving Mark to finish up inside. Robert was polite but direct, and right away he made it clear that he didn't blame me or Mark for what had happened at that dinner. He told me that I should be at ease knowing it wasn't our fault. That was a relief to hear, honestly, because even though I knew I'd done the right thing by exposing Jane's behavior, there was still a lingering part of me that felt guilty. Maybe it was because everyone else seemed to believe I had wrecked her future. But hearing it from Robert, a person directly involved, helped lift that weight off my shoulders. He told me he appreciated my honesty that night and that I hadn't ruined everything as Jane had claimed. Then he started opening up about his own concerns. Apparently, I wasn't the only one who had noticed Jane's harsh, critical nature. Over the past few months, Robert had begun to see cracks in their relationship, and my confrontation just brought everything to the surface. He admitted that Jane's behavior towards me had shocked him, but more than that, he had begun noticing her criticism extended to other areas of their life together. He described how Jane had become increasingly obsessed with status and material things, more interested in how much money he made than in their actual relationship. She would make offhand remarks about his career and what type of people he should be networking with, subtly trying to shape his life to match whatever image she had in her head. Robert wasn't naive. He understood that relationships involved a certain level of compromise and influence, but the more he paid attention, the more he realized Jane wasn't compromising. She was trying to control. She had even begun to criticize him in front of their friends under the guise of playful teasing, but it was always about his appearance or the things he didn't do right in her eyes. He said it started to feel like he was being molded into someone else, someone Jane deemed worthy of her time and energy. And it wasn't just their engagement that was falling apart. Her professional life was crumbling too. Jane had recently been let go from her latest job, another one of her adventures, as my parents like to call them. Jane has always been a drifter in her career, moving from one shiny opportunity to the next, but this time it was different. She hadn't left by choice. She was fired. Robert didn't go into specifics, but he hinted that her attitude and inability to work well with others had played a big part in it. This all happened right around the same time that things between them started unraveling, which only added to the stress. With her engagement in jeopardy and her career in shambles, Jane had reached out to me. She hadn't spoken to me since the night at the restaurant, but now out of nowhere she was sending me messages. The tone was completely different from before. There were no snide remarks, no passive-aggressive digs. Instead she sounded vulnerable, almost desperate. She was asking for support, saying that she felt lost and needed her sister. It was jarring to read because it was such a stark contrast from the Jane I'd come to expect, the one who had spent months making me feel like less than nothing. Part of me wanted to feel bad for her. Jane had always been the golden child in our family, the one who could do no wrong in our parents' eyes. Growing up, it felt like she could make any mistake and still land on her feet while I was constantly trying to measure up. And now everything she had built, or rather, everything she had carefully curated to look perfect from the outside, was crumbling around her. I could see how this was eating away at her, how desperate she must be to salvage something, anything from the wreckage. But then I remembered all the hurtful things she had said and done. I remembered sitting in the bathroom at my baby shower sobbing while my friends and family tried to comfort me because Jane had turned what should have been a joyful celebration into yet another opportunity to tear me down. I remembered the text where she called me a boring suburban mom and mocked my choice to have a family, how she made me feel like I was throwing away my life for choosing happiness over her version of success. I remembered all of it, and just like that, any sympathy I might have felt for her started to fade. I'm not ready to forgive her. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Even if she's going through a hard time, it doesn't erase the months of emotional damage she inflicted on me. I've been doing a lot of thinking about what it means to forgive someone, and I've realized that forgiveness isn't something you can just force because someone else is struggling. Forgiveness, if it ever comes, has to be genuine, and right now I'm nowhere near that place. My parents predictably are still sitting on the fence. When Jane reached out to them to tell her side of the story, they didn't really take a stance. They're sympathetic to her situation. Of course, they are. But they're still treating this whole thing like it's a minor squabble between siblings. They keep asking me if I've spoken to her yet, if I'm willing to sit down and work things out. I know they want me to be the one to fix things as usual, but this time, I refuse to be the one who makes the first move. I'm tired of being the one who bends, the one who's expected to smooth things over. For now, I'm trying to focus on my own family and the life Mark and I are building together. I don't have the energy to deal with Jane's mess, nor do I feel any obligation to clean it up. If she wants to fix things, she's going to have to figure it out on her own. I've spent too much time putting her needs above my own, and that's not something I'm willing to do anymore. Update 3. Hello, people. After my conversation with Robert, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Relief. It was like a weight had been lifted off my chest. For so long, I'd been carrying around this guilt, feeling like somehow I was responsible for what had happened between Jane and Robert, for the unraveling of her perfect life. But hearing Robert tell me directly that it wasn't my fault, that Jane had done this to herself, gave me a sense of peace. It validated everything I had been feeling all along. For the first time I realized that the guilt I'd been carrying around, the pressure from my parents, friends, and cousins to fix things, was misplaced. It wasn't my responsibility to mend what Jane had broken. With that newfound clarity, I decided it was time to confront Jane once and for all. I couldn't keep letting this drag on, and I certainly wasn't going to let anyone pressure me into forgiving her or smoothing things over for her sake. So I reached out and told her I wanted to meet in person. Not to reconcile, but to put an end to the mess once and for all. I needed her to know where I stood, and I needed her to hear it directly from me. When I arrived at Jane's place, she looked different, disheveled, distraught, and for the first time in a long while, vulnerable. But I knew better than to buy into her act. I had seen this side of Jane before, the side that could turn on the waterworks when things didn't go her way. This was the same person who had spent months belittling my life choices, making me feel like a failure for choosing to have a family. She might look broken now, but I wasn't going to let that change the reality of what she had done. I got straight to the point. I told her that I wasn't going to take any of the blame for what happened. This mess was hers and hers alone. She needed to own up to her actions and stop playing the victim. I made it clear that I wasn't the reason her engagement was falling apart or why her life seemed to be unraveling. It was her own behavior that had caused all of this. I could see the shock on her face as I spoke, but I wasn't there to soften the blow. I had been soft for too long. I also told her that if she wanted to make things right with Robert, she needed to apologize to him properly this time. For a second, I could feel myself slipping into a more controlling tone, almost like I was advising her on what to do. But it wasn't about controlling her. It was about giving her the chance to fix what little she had left. Whether she took that advice was up to her, but at least I had said my piece.